Did you have to start recording for that?
We're going to do it again. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Texas NORML April virtual meeting. I am joined by the amazing Morgan Fox from NORML. He is the political director, and we are going to be chatting today about what's going on at the federal level. If you've been tuned in over the last week, you probably texted me, one of many people who texted me and asked me if the MORE Act passing was an April Fool's joke. We don't joke about stuff like that. And it is, in fact, a real thing that happened, as well as a federal vote on cannabis research. So I want to invite Morgan, who's the political director for National NORML, to go ahead and would you set the stage for us and tell us a little bit about first the MORE Act and then about this research bill and what they do. You're muted.
Thanks for having me. The MORE Act was the first time that either chamber of Congress had voted on ending federal prohibition in over 50 years when it originally passed in December of 2020. Unfortunately, it did not pass into the Senate at that time. And since then, we've been working on getting another vote for it. When I came on board with NORML at the beginning of the year after doing stints at MPP and NCIA, one of the main priorities that I had was making sure that we could get this thing across the finish line as soon as possible. And we had an opportunity to do so because of some support that both our allies and my predecessor, Justin Streckel, had built up over the preceding years to put a lot of pressure on House leadership to get this done. And after months of hard work and getting additional co-sponsors and trying to make sure that waffling Democrats and ones that were up for re-election and were afraid of the impact of a vote on this would have on their chances of getting re-elected, we finally were able to get a vote on this. Interestingly enough, the day before, or maybe a couple days before that happened, out of the blue, the Senate decided to call a research bill that was sponsored by Senator Feinstein from California that would help facilitate research for cannabis at the federal level. Unfortunately, that bill does not actually contain any sort of language that allows researchers to be able to access products that are available at state level markets. So it was a little bit of a Pyrrhic victory, but the fact that it passed unanimously after 30 seconds of debate was pretty amazing. And a little bit interesting given that Senate Majority Leader Schumer had not really signaled that he was going to let anything involving cannabis really get forward before he was able to introduce his big omnibus descheduling bill that he's been teasing for over a year now. So anyway, the MORE Act, which deschedules cannabis and helps to repair the harms caused by the war on drugs through expungement and civil protections for cannabis consumers and community reinvestment, was able to pass by a pretty decent margin, with only 2 Democrats voting against and 3 voting for. But aside from that, pretty much along party lines. So this is only the second time in recent history that Congress has decided to or has voted to end prohibition, either chamber. So what's happening now with that bill is that it has been passed on to the Senate, but it is probably going to sit there because Senator Schumer wants to introduce the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act at some point this month. One of the great things about passing the MORE Act when we did is that it provides added momentum and it helps to keep Senator Schumer to that timetable because of all the things that are going on in the world and the fact that Senate timetables tend to be a little bit chaotic. This will help us maintain that timetable so that we can actually start having substantive conversations in the Senate on legalizing cannabis, which we haven't had before. Also, the following Monday, the House passed a research bill that has quite a bit more teeth in it and that is allowing researchers to be able to access products that are available in state legal markets, which is clearly much more important for getting real solid data about what commonly available cannabis strains and products are impacting public health and safety. Whereas before, and with the Senate bill, they would only be able to access the garbage coming out of Mississippi.
Right. We are familiar with the issue in Mississippi. Our veterans talk about it a lot, especially because, there's a lot of research that supports, you need at least 14% THC. And, the stuff coming out of Mississippi is literally they pull the plant out of the ground with the root ball and grind it all up. Sounds good. So that's good to know that a research bill passed in both chambers, but they are different. They are not the same research bill. One does allow you to use the state made products and the other does not, correct?
That's correct. The House version is significantly better than the Senate version. So at some point, this is going to go to a conference committee, and I'm in conversations right now with the House sponsors of the much better research bill to try to determine what our best course of action is for making sure that the Senate will allow the House version to pass. If I'm being totally realistic, I tend to think that the Senate is going to try to force its version down the House's throat, and that they might capitulate because it may be the only chance for them to pass a cannabis bill this year, considering all the partisan rancor that has been going on and all of the other issues that are going on in the world that are taking up Congress's time. So, but that doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. And I think that if we hit the right pressure points in the Senate, as well as gather as much House support as we can during the interim weeks and months between now and when this bill starts getting worked out in conference, we might be able to have a chance to get the better bill enacted. So please make sure to reach out to your lawmakers.
Yeah, so it sounds like we need to talk to our senators specifically about allowing for state-made products to be allowed through that conference committee. And, there's several action alerts I think that you're working on right now. Of course, you said the MORE Act is heading over to the Senate, but there might be a pause in the Senate because of Schumer's bill, which I believe is supposed to come out sometime this month, correct?
Supposedly. One of the reasons that we wanted to pass the MORE Act when we did, as opposed to waiting till later in the year, is that we really wanted to, put a burner to Senator Schumer to make sure that he sticks to the timeline that he announced last month. And it looks like that is going to happen. He's been reaching out to now Republican members of the Senate to see what he can do to get them on board, which, up until about last week was primarily just focused on Democratic committee chairs and committee sub chairs. So I think that overall, this is a really good sign that there's going to be movement soon, but anything can happen.
Right. The news of the day kind of goes to the top. I know that cannabis is important, but maybe sometimes not the top of the list for everyone. So there are a couple actions. I think there's also one for the MORE Act, President Biden, and then what you were just talking about feedback for Schumer's legislation that people can go to normal.org/act and participate in. Is there any other, I'm checking to see if there's any questions specifically about the federal items, and someone is asking, why aren't major cannabis companies doing more research? Is there a reason why? And one of the things that I would say, of course, is it's hard to get an IRB approved for it, and you have to have a NIDA certified approved IRB along with getting access to that not so fabulous NIDA medicine. Is there any other reason that maybe companies are not doing more research right now?
Well, I think a lot of companies are doing research. They're just doing it in countries where there are far fewer barriers to research, like Canada, Israel, Germany, various countries in Latin America, even a growing number of countries within the EU. There are far fewer barriers to research in some of these places than there are in the United States. So, a lot of these companies are reaching out there, or they're just doing non-federally approved research, which happens all the time. But I honestly,
like
I can't speak for those. Yeah, I can't speak for exactly what those companies are doing because there are just so many of them, and I've been seeing a lot of good research that's been backed by companies, both large and small. I've seen private enterprises started up in order to facilitate research and conduct research themselves. So, I mean, it's really all across the board, but, the fact of the matter is that while there is still a significant amount of cannabis research going on in the United States, a lot more could be happening if we remove those barriers of research through descheduling. And even if we cannot deschedule, these research bills would go a long way towards helping that in terms of allowing for the initiation of additional producers beyond the University of Mississippi. And the DEA is starting to license them, but they've been dragging their feet for years, and they're now just starting to grant some of these licenses. So it's going to be really slow going for them to be able to get set up in time for being able to initiate a lot of these studies, and we need data as soon as possible. So, the
But I also
sooner.
think it's important that we don't get caught in the kind of logical fallacy that we need more research. Cannabis is one of the more researched items. Like when you look on PubMed, tens of thousands of research studies on this. So in order for us to change policy, we don't necessarily need more research. In order for us to perfect science and medicine, we absolutely do. So I do just want to point that out, that we don't want to get caught in that idea.
That's perfectly said.
Awesome. Yeah, I like it when I say things perfectly. Well, Morgan, I was wondering if you had any final takeaways on what our people in Texas can do to support what you are working on up in DC.
I mean, really just continue contacting your lawmakers and continue checking in with NORML for additional action alerts that may be a little bit more targeted. And also make sure to check your email inboxes on the regular, because we are constantly sending out calls to action that might not necessarily be on our webpage. That might target specific lawmakers or specific federal agencies. So just make sure to open those emails, and if you can, just take the time to follow through with the actions, whether it's a phone call or an email. And eventually we're going to start having a lot more impact than we do now, which is way more than we've ever had in the past. So.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Morgan, I really appreciate you coming on and giving us a 411 on what's going on, what to look forward to. I'm going to pivot over to talking about voting records. So thank you so much. And I will see you in the office tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, Morgan. All right, guys. So we want to know how everybody voted in Texas, right? And there is a lot of different people, there are a lot of different people that are asking, what is the voting record for my person? So there are quite a few people, let's see how many exactly, that voted no on, I'm going to discuss first the MORE Act. It looks like there are 25 people that voted no on the MORE Act. And if you look at the vote totals, I believe it ended up being about like 20% of the votes were from Texas. Stephen is dropping that voting record chart in the chat here. So if you can just go ahead and click on that, that will take you to look at it. Of course, I'm not going to go name by name, but there are, some people in here you might recognize: Dan Crenshaw, Louis Gomert. I think almost with one exception, it falls along party lines that it was Republicans that voted nay. I would like to point out that Troy Nails voted nay, and he had requested feedback from people within his district, and we did message his district, and we know they gave him feedback. So it's sad to see that he still decided to vote nay. The one Democrat who did decide to also vote nay on the MORE Act is Henry Cuellar. And what I would like to point out is that he is in a runoff race. Congressional District 28, both the Democratic and the Republican primary are going off to runoff. So on the Democratic side, it's immigration attorney Jessica Cisneros against Congressman Henry Cuellar. So that is something to definitely keep in mind when you go to vote in the primary runoff elections. And then let's pivot over to talking about this, the medical marijuana research bill that was in the House. So just to be clear, this is the research bill that did allow for the state created products to be used. And so you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Texans were voting no, all of them Republican. Sad to see Troy Nails in there again, Chip Roy again. Unsurprised to see Pete Sessions in there. How do we keep getting stuck with read sessions, you guys? We have to stop. Can we talk about this? So there's that voting record there. You can look up, just Google who represents me, put in your address, and you can find out who your legislator is on here and find out how they voted in this important vote that happened last week. So let's talk about primary. Well, actually, let me just come to the chat real quick and see if there are any questions really quick. Daryl, I'm going to get to the runoffs in just 1 second, so I will come back to that. Jamie would like to know that on January 19th, 2022, the FBI raided Kralar's Laredo residence and campaign office, removing items, including cases and at least one computer, as part of a federal probe related to Azerbaijan. Ooh, that's great. Stephen has also dropped who represents me in there for you guys, so you can find that there. All right, let's talk about primary runoff elections. So first of all, if you go to texasnormal.org and you look at the very top, you will see our voter guide. You can click there and look and see how the legislators in your area voted on the issues. Now, not every single locality has a primary runoff, but there are, I believe, like 33 races altogether that will be in the primary runoff. Some of them are state level, some of them are federal, some of them are statewide. And so there's just a few that I did want to touch on. Of course, you can go find out if you're in a primary runoff district and go to texasnormal.org and take a look at our Texas NORML marijuana policy voter guide. But the primary runoff election is going to be, early voting is going to be from May 16th to the 20th. An actual primary runoff election day will be May 24th. Now, it's extremely important to know that in a primary, you vote on either the Republican or the Democratic ticket. So whichever one you voted for in the first round of primary voting back in March is what you're going to need to stick to. Now, if you didn't vote in March and you plan to participate starting in May, that's fine. You'll get to pick which party you want to participate in. And that is how that will work for you. A few things of note is I did want to mention the Attorney General race. So Ken Paxton has been forced into a May runoff where he'll face former Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush. George P. Bush, I do want to point out, was on a Forbes business stream the other day, toting the status quo of prohibition and also saying he would go after localities who want to liberalize cannabis laws. So I did want to make sure that that was pointed out. However, Paxton is also being investigated by the FBI over accusations that he used his office to help a wealthy donor. So just full disclosure there. Now, for the same race, Attorney General on the Democratic ticket, the Democratic nomination is in a runoff as well. Rochelle Mercedes Garza got 41% of the vote, and Joe Jaworski got 22% of the vote. So they will be facing a runoff election. Of course, both of them are talking about cannabis law reform in a very positive way. I encourage you to look them up and find who is most in line with you. Now, next is Lieutenant Governor. You know, Dan Patrick did win the Republican nomination. And as everyone watching, I'm sure well knows, he is our biggest limitation, pinch point, stop person in our work to get cannabis laws reformed here in Texas. So the Lieutenant Governor is an extremely important race, and he is going to be the incumbent on the Republican nomination, but the Democratic nomination has not yet been decided. It's going to be Michael Collier against Michelle Beckley, who's a former House representative. So that is definitely one to watch. Now, if you follow cannabis law reform in Texas, you probably know that every bill having to do with medical cannabis that has passed the state legislature has been authored by one Stephanie Click out of House District 91. Stephanie Click is facing a runoff election and is up against one David Lowe. They were separated by just a couple hundred, about 700 votes. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with that that election there. Now, the last one that I wanted to make sure I mentioned, this is me speaking purely to my Austin, Texas folks, is if you live in the Austin city limits, you probably recall that Texas NORML worked with the Austin City Council over a year ago to pass a resolution that removed any budgetary line items allowing for THC testing or for arresting people for personal amounts of cannabis or spending any law enforcement time on minor marijuana charges or stops. So that that resolution is looking to be codified through a ballot initiative. And that is going to be on the ballot here in Austin, Texas. And that is going to be early voting from April 25th to May 3rd. And then election day is going to be on May 7th. Now, I just got a text from them. Ground Game Texas, they are taking the lead on this ballot initiative, Mike and Jamie Oliver, and they said that I can click here to request my free yard sign. Guess where I'm about to click and get my free yard sign? So if you want to do that, I wanted to make sure and let you guys know that you can get a yard sign. Make sure that you are going out and voting. We will be putting out emails to our Austin people to remind you as early voting and voting day approaches for that. So I would like to pivot real quick to the chat box and see if I have any questions before we kind of wrap up the meeting this evening. Let's see. Debbie is asking, why are people in Texas detained for low-level THC when low-level THC products are being sold in Texas now? Okay, so in Texas, hemp, which has 0.3% THC or less, is legal. If you are a registered patient, you are allowed to carry products that have formulations of up to 1% of THC per dry weight. Any percentage of THC higher than that is considered illicit marijuana. And because of that, you cannot tell necessarily from just the look or the smell of the cannabis flower as to how much THC it has in it. And so sometimes people are being harassed when they have hemp products and it has to go through the testing, and it definitely can be problematic. I do want to say that Jamie Spencer, who is our legal counsel, will be hosting one of our upcoming meetings, and he always does a really wonderful Know Your Rights where he takes a million questions. I know you guys love to watch those, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. Let's see. Michael wants to know if there are yard signs available in cities outside of Austin. No, this is an Austin city proposal that will only be on the Austin city ballot. So they will only be giving out signs within the Austin city limits. However, they are working on initiatives in San Marcos, Killeen, and Denton. And if those initiatives can get on the ballot there as well, then people in those cities will also be able to get some yard signs. So I just wanted to clarify that this is a citywide resolution having to do with making it binding that no financial expenditure or officer time can be spent on any personal amounts of marijuana possession. I also wanted to remind anybody that is watching right now that we would love for y'all to become a Texas NORML member. You can go to texasnorml.org and click shop or join, and you can become a member there. We've got a really awesome Tumblr for you guys this year. We do a members only item, so you only get this item if you are a member of Texas NORML. Last time we did a cooler tote that was really handy, and I love to take my lunch everywhere in. And this time we have a pint glass tumbler for you with our logo on it. So make sure that you join, or please donate to support our efforts. Right now, of course, we are in the election cycle of the 2-year cycle here in Texas. And after the general election in November, just 6 days later, our legislators start pre-filing legislation, and our legislative session will start in January of 2023. So we have a lot of work to do in between now and then, friends. I look forward to working with y'all over the next few months, it keeps getting shorter and shorter, like time is going so fast. But on that note, I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, tuning in and watching. I want to thank Morgan for joining us to talk about the MORE Act and the federal research bills that passed the differing versions in the Senate and the House. And then I also want to thank Stephen for helping tonight, making sure that we had those voting records available for you guys and all of the links available. So on that note, I am going to bid y'all adieu, and we will be back next month. Of course, we meet on the first Wednesday of every month virtually. And in May, we will be doing an in-person social down at the Flamingo Cantina. So stay tuned, everyone, and have a lovely evening.